It's October 1994, and a desperate search for two young boys has gripped the nation.
I want to say to my babies that your mama loves you so much.
Their mother, Susan Smith, claims she's been carjacked and her sons, Michael and Alex, taken by a black man. The boy's father, David Smith, sticking by his wife's side, just like much of the country. But it's all a lie. After 9 days of searching, Susan Smith confesses to buckling her boys into the family car and driving it into a lake. Susan Smith is...
A young mother stands in front of cameras, her voice trembling, her eyes filled with tears as she begs for the safe return of her two little boys. She tells the world that a stranger took them, that her car was stolen with her children still inside, and that somewhere out there, her bobbies are waiting to be rescued. The fear feels real. The pain feels undeniable, and people across the country begin to hold on to hope with her. But what if the person asking for help already knows how the story ends? In October 1994, in a quiet town in Union, Susan Smith became the center of a story that would grip an entire nation. She was young, soft-spoken, and by all appearances, a devoted mother. When she reported that her car had been hijacked by an unknown man who drove off with her children inside, it triggered immediate panic. Law enforcement responded quickly, and within hours, the case began to spread far beyond her hometown. News stations picked it up. Volunteers gathered. Strangers who had never met her began praying for her children's safe return. The image of a grieving mother pleading on television became impossible to ignore. Her voice cracked as she spoke, her face drained of hope, and for many watching, there was no reason to doubt her. It felt like every parent's worst nightmare unfolding in real time. But as the days began to pass, something subtle started to shift. Beneath the emotion and urgency, small details didn't quite align. Investigators listened carefully, watching, questioning, and quietly piecing together a puzzle that didn't seem to fit. Still, the public held on to hope, believing that the truth was exactly what she said it was. And if you find yourself drawn into stories like this, where every detail matters and nothing is quite what it seems, take a moment to like, subscribe, and follow along, because this story is only just beginning. Because sometimes, the most heartbreaking stories aren't built on what we see, but on what's being carefully hidden. The search for the children quickly became a national obsession. Police combed the streets, officers and volunteers spread out in forests, and helicopters scanned the highways. News cameras followed every lead, broadcasting the mother's emotional pleas over and over. The story gripped the public: a mother in despair, two innocent children in danger, and a mysterious stranger responsible for the crime. People prayed, hoped, and feared the worst, desperate for any sign that the children were safe. Susan Smith's story seemed complete. She described the events of that night with vivid detail: the sudden attack, the struggle, and how the man had driven away with her boys. It was a narrative that stirred compassion and urgency. Communities mobilized. Every sighting, every tip was treated as potentially life-saving. The country watched, emotionally invested, believing that soon there would be a miraculous reunion. Even as the search continued, subtle cracks began to appear in her story. Investigators noticed inconsistencies. Timing didn't add up, and certain facts were hard to verify. The man she described couldn't be found, and the description she gave seemed oddly general. While the nation held its breath, detectives quietly examined every angle, every statement, and every possible discrepancy. Something wasn't right, but what? Meanwhile, the media frenzy intensified. Television anchors repeated her story nightly. Interviews with neighbors painted a picture of a loving mother, someone who would do anything for her children. Social pressure and emotional intensity swirled together, creating a perfect storm of attention, sympathy, and suspense. If this story is gripping you so far, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the twists and turns ahead are even more shocking. The truth, slowly unfolding behind the scenes, is far darker than anyone could have imagined. And soon, everything the world believed about that desperate mother would be turned upside down. Days passed and the nation held its collective breath, waiting for news of the missing children. Every lead seemed promising, yet every search ended in disappointment. The tension built, not just in the streets of Union but across the country, where families and strangers alike prayed for a happy ending. Reporters camped outside her home, replaying her tearful pleas, while law enforcement quietly pieced together fragments of her story. What should have been a clear path to rescue, instead, became a maze of uncertainty and suspicion. Under the scrutiny of investigators, Susan Smith's account began to unravel. Each interview, each cross-questioning revealed inconsistencies, small at first, easily overlooked but enough to make detectives pause. Why did certain details change from one telling to the next? Why did timelines fail to match physical evidence? Slowly, the image of the grieving mother began to shift. Behind the tears, behind the sorrowful voice, something darker seemed to be hiding. The pressure mounted. Law enforcement intensified questioning, tracing her steps, analyzing her statements, and checking alibis. And then, after 9 days, the unimaginable happened. Susan Smith confessed. The story that had held the nation captive, the heroic search for children taken by a stranger, was a fabrication. She admitted the truth. The children had never been abducted. The car, the night, the stranger, it was all a lie she had carefully constructed. Authorities recovered the vehicle from John D. Longlake, confirming the worst fears. The boys, Michael and Alexander,
I do
were
understand
gone. The
why
world
they're having to do
recoiled
what
at
they're
the
doing.
revelation. Shock turned to
I'm all they
disbelief.
have.
Disbelief
Right now,
turned to
they have
anger.
not been able to rule
Millions
anyone
had
out.
followed
I
her
don't think I'm
story,
any more
shared her tears,
of a
and
suspect
prayed
than
for a
anyone in
miracle
this
that
case
would
right
never
now.
come.
It's
If
very
this revelation
painful
shocks you,
to know
take a
that
moment to
anyone
hit
would
like
think
and subscribe.
that either of
Because the
us had
story
anything
isn't
to
just
do
about a crime.
with this abduction
It's
of our
about the
children.
darkness that can hide
But
behind
me
a smile,
and my
behind
wife
sorrow,
know the truth.
behind the face of someone we trust the most. The consequences of that night would ripple far beyond the borders of Union, South Carolina, changing lives forever. The question everyone asked now was why? How could a mother, someone entrusted with the lives of her children, commit such a horrific act? Investigators dug deeper into Susan Smith's life, looking for motives, patterns, anything that could explain the unthinkable. They discovered that she had been in a relationship with a man who did not want children. In her mind, her sons had become obstacles, preventing the continuation of a love she desperately clung to. Her actions, as horrifying as they were, had been calculated, born from a twisted combination of fear, desire, and desperation. When the trial began in 1995, the courtroom was packed, the atmosphere tense and electric. The prosecution presented a detailed narrative of premeditation, showing how the story of a carjacking was fabricated, how she had strapped her children into the car seats, and how she had driven the vehicle into the lake. Every piece of evidence, every testimony painted a portrait of planning and cold intent. The defense, however, focused on her emotional state. They argued that she suffered from deep psychological turmoil and that her actions were influenced by mental instability. The jury had to grapple not only with the facts of the crime, but with the complexity of the human mind, the fragile boundary between desperation and depravity. Public reaction was intense. Media outlets dissected every moment of the trial, airing the evidence and exploring her motives, while communities across the nation debated justice, punishment, and the capacity for remorse. Some saw her as evil incarnate. Others tried to understand the psychology behind her decision. If you're following closely, don't forget to like and share this story, and subscribe to True Crime Log to uncover the full journey from crime to courtroom. When the verdict finally came, Susan Smith was found guilty on 2 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison, avoiding the death penalty. The trial closed one chapter but opened a larger conversation about morality, mental health, and the darkest corners of human behavior. The story of that night would haunt the nation forever, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most shocking monsters are the ones we least suspect. Decades have passed since that tragic night, but the story of Susan Smith has never faded from public memory. The case remains one of the most infamous in American true crime history, studied in classrooms, discussed on talk shows, and revisited in documentaries. It serves as a stark reminder of how appearances can deceive, how grief can be manipulated, and how the consequences of a single choice can ripple through generations. In prison, Susan Smith has lived under constant scrutiny. Interviews, reports, and occasional media attention have painted a picture of a woman trying to navigate life behind bars, yet never escaping the shadow of her crime. Her attempts at rehabilitation and personal reflection have been documented, but for many, the question remains: can someone who took the lives of their own children ever truly be redeemed? Recently, her parole eligibility brought the story back into the headlines. After serving over 30 years, she was considered for release, sparking renewed debates about justice, accountability, and forgiveness. Survivors, family members, and the wider public voiced opposition, asserting that the crime was too severe, too calculated to allow freedom. The hearing served as a reminder that while time moves forward, some wounds never fully heal. Stories like Susan Smith's make us confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, morality, and the fragility of trust. They remind us that the person we expect to protect us might, in some circumstances, become the source of unimaginable harm. If you've been captivated by this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share so that more people can reflect on the lessons it offers and the chilling reality behind the headlines. Ultimately, the story of Susan Smith is not just a tale of crime. It is a story of deception, lost innocence, and the long-lasting echoes of tragedy. Sometimes, the darkest truths are found not in strangers lurking in the shadows, but in the people we think we know best. The story lingers, haunting, a sobering reminder of the fragile line between love and destruction.